Yes, ma'am.
Have you shared with them how our focus in the museum is also turning on to this one-on-one interpretation and all the classes you're doing?
I have not. Would you like to? We are doing a lot of first-person classes now because what we're discovering is that more and more and more people really like that one-on-one relationship. They like the fact that history comes alive and they can literally reach out and touch the individual. We're also, and it's not just all first person, but we're also focusing on third person. When we tell the story, that's exactly what we're doing. We're telling a story. It's not a lecture. It's a dialogue. It's about how history today is so very, very much connected, you know, with past and present linked in a way that you can't even begin to imagine. That there are all sorts of ways of linking it, and that just because you live in today, what happened 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 100 years ago, doesn't affect you. Yes, it does. I just recently we're doing the Uncommon Ohio tours, if none of you have gone on those, and they're on a variety of subjects. One of them in January was called The Wounds You Don't See. And it was all about post-traumatic stress syndrome, or the beginnings thereof. Back during the Civil War, they didn't have post-traumatic stress syndrome. They didn't even know about it. What they discovered was that there was this, what they called the nervous disease, and they called it by a number of names. One of them was soldier's heart, and the other one, you will find this interesting, was called nostalgia. Now, nostalgia has a very different meaning for us today. You know, we get all warm and fuzzy when we think about nostalgia. That's not what it meant in the Civil War. When a soldier was labeled with nostalgia, he was sick. He was very, very ill. And the doctors knew that there was no way to treat him. They didn't understand they understood what the symptoms were, and they thought they understood what caused it, but they really didn't know how to treat it. So their treatment, their cure, was to send them home. Well, the reason I'm sharing this with you is because there was a study that was recently started back in about 2008 where they've opened up the medical records of the Civil War soldiers. Now, there was a big hoopla over that because they were said, oh, you know, HIPAA won't allow you to do that. These guys have been dead for almost 150 years. I'm thinking they probably don't care, but you never know. Got to check. So anyway, long story short, this study is ongoing, but what they have discovered, they followed soldiers that enlisted. And then they followed them for 30 years after the war, which was a phenomenal study. And as I say, it's still going on. It isn't completed. And what they discovered was this. We had soldiers who were as young as 9 and 10 years old who enlisted, ran away and enlisted. From the age of about 10 up to 17, because they put them into 3 categories, 9, about 10 to 17, 18 up to about 27, and then 30 and up. The ones that were in that first category, the young ones, they discovered, following them over a 30-year period, that they had incredible difficulty readjusting to normal life because their nervous systems as young men, quite frankly, were not developed enough to handle the extraordinary trauma that they were being exposed to. The guys who were in the next category, the 17 up to like 27, they did a little bit better. There was a 50-50 thing with them because their nervous systems were a little more developed. The guys who were 30 and on up, they handled it pretty well. Now, here's the interesting thing. They took 2 case studies, or 2 case studies that I will share with you. One of them was a young man who was in that second category. And when he came home, he had been married, had children. He ended up leaving his wife and kids because he couldn't deal with it. He couldn't deal with life, and went off somewhere. And they you know, don't know what, over 30 years, he would periodically resurface. The bottom line was this. His wife was very embittered and just badmouthed him to no end to her children, which then carried on to the next generation, to the next generation. So 3 generations, all resulting from something that happened during the Civil War, and it affected the people today. The second case was a young man who was captured, put in a POW camp. As a result, became an alcoholic. 3 generations of alcoholism ruined his family. It was fascinating. It's a fascinating study. And when people say, oh, you know, what happened back then doesn't affect me today, yeah, it does. in more ways than you can even begin to imagine. So that's why it's so important that we have this one-on-one exchange with people here in the museum. That's why it's so important that we tell the stuff of history and the story. That it's not a lecture, it's a conversation, and as I say, a dialogue.
Mike?
Yeah?
What's the ongoing Saturday afternoon shows that we're having in March? You might want to love it.
Okay, Echoes in Time, we actually have two. We have the Uncommon Ohio tours, which are going on, and Darlene is not working today. That would be the reason I am. And I'm doing the one today. It's on women's roles.
You're playing the woman?
Okay, I have to really, really watch my tongue on this one. And be, non-biased. The Echoes in Time presentation, I don't know whether you guys want to go see this or not. It's Victoria Woodhull, who was, in fact, I decline to stand as a frightful example. She was the first woman to run for the presidency in 1872. She owned a brokerage firm for women on Wall Street. She advocated an 8-hour day. Imagine that. Women's rights, all sorts of things. She was a very forward-thinking woman, and as I'm fond of saying after studying her and researching her, quite honestly, if she'd had a spin doctor like some of the politicians had today, she'd have been the president back in 1872. The problem was she was so forceful and so strong that she scared the bejeebers out of the men who supported her. So those are the two things that are going on today.
Okay, thank you.
And this month.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah.